Welcome back, Awesome Possums. I'd like to read to you the story, Frog and Toad, the Garden, written by Arnold LaBelle. Today's genre is fantasy. A fantasy is a story that cannot happen in real life. Look for animals that talk and act like real people and events that could not really happen. Our target skill is story structure. Story structure is the parts of the story that work together. Characters are the people and the animals. The setting is when and where the story takes place. Events make up the plot. The plot is often about a problem and how the characters solve it. A story map can help you tell about the different parts. Let's go ahead and begin reading the story, Frog and Toad, the Garden, which you can find in the book, Frog and Toad Together. Frog was in his garden. Toad came walking by. "What a fine garden you have, Frog," he said. "Yes," said Frog, "it is very nice, but it is hard work." "I wish I had a garden," said Toad. "Here are some flower seeds. Plant them in the ground," said Frog, "and soon you will have a garden." "How soon?" asked Toad. "Quite soon," said Frog. Toad ran home. He planted the seeds. "Now, seeds," said Toad, "start growing." Toad walked up and down a few times. The seeds did not start to grow. Toad put his head close to the ground and said loudly, "Now, seeds, start growing." Toad looked at the ground again. The seeds did not start to grow. Toad put his head very close to the ground and shouted, "Now, seeds, start growing." Frog came running up the path. "What is all that noise?" he asked. "My seeds will not grow," said Toad. "You are shouting too much," said Frog. "These poor seeds are afraid to grow." "My seeds are afraid to grow?" asked Toad. "Of course," said Frog. "Leave them alone for a few days. Let the sun shine on them. Let the rain fall on them. Soon your seeds will start to grow." That night Toad looked out of his window. "Drat," said Toad, "my seeds have not started to grow. They must be afraid of the dark." Toad went out to the garden with some candles. "I will read the seeds a story," said Toad. "Then they will not be afraid." Toad read a long story to his seeds. All the next day Toad sang songs to his seeds. And all the next day Toad read poems to his seeds. And all the next day Toad played music for his seeds. Toad looked at the ground. The seeds still did not start to grow. "What shall I do?" cried Toad. "These must be the most frightened seeds in the whole world." Then Toad felt very tired and he fell asleep. "Toad, Toad, wake up," said Frog. "Look at your garden." Toad looked at his garden. Little green plants were coming up out of the ground. "At last," shouted Toad, "my seeds have stopped being afraid to grow." "And now you will have a nice garden too," said Frog. "Yes," said Toad, "but you were right, Frog. It was very hard work." Okay, Awesome Possums, let's dig deeper into story structure. Frog and Toad are characters in the garden. What kind of place is the setting of the story? Does the story happen during the day, at night, or both? Think about the problem Toad has and how it is solved. We will use the story map to write text evidence about the characters, setting, and important events. Let's look at characters in this story. The two main characters were Frog and Toad. In this story, there were only two characters. In other stories, there were more characters. Remember, you want to name the characters who do most of the talking in the story. The setting was in a garden during the day and night. Remember, boys and girls, Toad was planting a garden. Where did he spend most of his time? In the garden. What did he do to the garden at night? He set candles out and he read the garden stories. During the day, what did he do? He read poems and he played music to the garden. So the setting is in a garden during the day and the night, and we use text evidence to prove that. When we begin listing the events in the story, we want to start with the first event. The first event in the story was the frog gave Toad seeds to grow a garden, and Frog told Toad it is hard work to grow a garden. The next event was Toad planted the seeds but yelled at the garden when it would not grow. Frog told Toad the seeds were too afraid to grow. The third event was day and night. Toad sang, read poems, and played music to his garden, but the garden still did not grow. The final event was Toad fell asleep next to the garden, and Frog woke him up to show him his garden had begun to grow. Boys and girls, these were the events in the story. They're the plot, what happens in the beginning, what happens in the middle, and what happens in the end. The plot is very important, and the plot has to be written in order of the events. You can't have event 4 be first. Toad fell asleep next to the garden, and Frog woke him up to show him his garden had begun to grow. That couldn't be first in the events. It has to be last, because that's the last thing that happened in the story. That's the end of our story today, Awesome Possums. I hope you liked Frog and Toad, the garden. Like this video and subscribe to my channel. New lessons are posted weekly. Work on your growth mindset, and remember, all things are difficult before they get easy. Have a great day, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.